In the second half, we're going to cover visibility and access. So Unanet is a role-based system. So essentially what users are able to view and edit within the system is controlled by roles that they are granted via their user profile or the project profile. So we do have some common types like admin users. We have a couple different admin users, user roles, people roles, project admins, and financial roles. So in conjunction with those roles, we also have different types of access that we can grant to individuals. So if we want to grant finite access to an individual, we can via the project profile. So like a project admins are samples of roles where you can give somebody visibility, project viewership, or project editability, for one project or two projects or a handful of projects, or you can give them broad access to a bucket of projects that may share a common owning organization. So, in terms of visibility and access, it's important to find the right combination of roles and org access that's going to give your users the visibility and functionality that they need to be successful at their jobs. All right, so in terms of roles, we'll start here at a very high level. So the administrator roles we have within the system, there's 3 of them. So the highest level is the administrator. So this is your system-wide God level administrator, and it gives them access to everything within the system. They can edit all projects, all people, system properties, administrative settings, and so on. Kind of one tier down from that is the P&R administrator. So P&R stands for project and resource. So what that is, think of it as the system-wide administrator minus a lot of the financial capabilities. The P&R administrator also doesn't have access to your system properties. They can't change your system-wide properties, but they do have access to some of your admin setup, like project statuses, project types, etc. So anything that's related to people or projects, they would be able to edit those settings and edit that data as well. And then finally, HR admin. So think of this as our P&R admin minus the project side. So HR admin, they have access to your people, all your people reports. They can edit all your people data. But as far as projects, they don't have access to that, and they don't have access to system properties. All right, your user roles, these are pretty basic. So these are the roles that most of your users are probably going to have within the system. When you initially create them, you'll probably just check these roles for them by default. So that's the expense user, timesheet user, and if you have the portfolio license, the Unisource user, which allows plans to be created for those users. So some other roles here, we got manager and viewer. These are what I like to call people roles. So what they do is the manager gives you the ability to approve timesheets and expense reports for your users via the approval groups. So in order to be designated as an approver within one of your admin setup approval groups, you would need to designate an individual as a manager. So by default, managers, and this applies to project approvers as well, if you are responsible for approving, a timesheet or an expense report, Unanet knows that you need to have access and visibility into those timesheets and those expense reports. So, by default, your primary approvers, whether it's a manager or it's a project approver, they will have access to time and expense as it pertains to those individuals they're responsible for approving. And then the viewer role, it's like the manager role, but you can't really approve timesheet. So the viewer role is suitable for people where you just want to give them visibility to run people reports on a subset of users. You could give them the viewer role. So it's like the manager role minus the ability to approve timesheets and expense reports. All right, project administrator role. So these are roles that you can configure at the project within the project profile. So the key ones are project manager and project lead. So project manager is a required field for all your projects. Every project must have a project manager, and project managers have access to edit project data, so they can create new projects, they can edit current projects, they can change project codes, project titles, project types. So they have a lot of editing capabilities. Project lead's kind of a tier down from the project manager. So project lead has the ability to edit tasks on a project, but they're limited in what they can change within the project profile. And in the project viewers, kind of the last tier there, where it just gives people visibility into the project reports. So project manager is one of those roles. If you have a financial license, you might want to be very cognizant and mindful of who you grant the project manager role to, because they do have the ability to change some fields that could impact how things flow to your financial statements. So project type would be a good example where you could be using project types to map to your general ledger. So if somebody's a project manager and they aren't familiar with the role that project type plays in your financial reporting, they could make the wrong choice there. So last but not least, here we got project approver. So that we talked about the manager. The project approver is a supplemental approval process. It runs in parallel with our approval groups. So at the project level, we can designate individuals to approve time or expense as it pertains to that specific project. So the project approver is kind of unique in that you can't just go to a user's profile and designate them as a project approver. Since this one is it's project specific, it's a role that has to be granted within the project profile. All right, and so here are some of the other project admin roles. Billing manager, so that gives somebody the ability to edit the invoice setup within the project profile, and they can generate invoices, run billing and revenue posts for that project. The billing viewer is the billing manager minus the ability to create invoices or edit any properties or settings. The billing viewer is commonly given to the same people who are managing projects, so they can stay on top of the invoice status and whatnot. It also gives visibility into AR aging as it pertains to that particular project. Then last but not least, we have the resource planner, resource assigner. So resource planner allows users to create plans on that particular project, and resource assigner allows people to create assignments. So assignments are granting authorization to charge time or expense to a project, whereas plans are like assignments, but they don't really grant authorization to charge to a project. They're primarily for reporting and informational purposes. Right. So next, let's talk about financial roles. We have at a high level here, we have AP, AR, and GL roles, and within AP, AR, and the general ledger, we have viewers, users, posters, and admin. So for viewer, for example, we have an AP viewer, an AR viewer, and a GL viewer. So as with all roles in Unanet, if you see viewer within the title, it's usually an indication that it grants read-only access. So that's exactly what these roles are doing for us. The AP viewer, they can run your AP aging report, your vendor activity report, but they're restricted from the ability to actually create vendor invoices or vendor payments within the system. So the user roles, so we have an AP user, AR user, GL user. So these roles grant individuals the ability to actually create financial documents. So an AP user can create a vendor invoice. They can create a vendor payment. AR users can create customer payments and deposits, and the GL user can create journal entries. But that's kind of where it ends for them. So the user has all the viewing capabilities that the viewer does, plus the ability to create financial documents, but they are prevented from being able to post. So that kind of leads us into the next role, the poster role. These are the users who have the capability to actually post financial documents. So if you wanted to have some sort of segregation of duties or some sort of approval process within your financial processes, your AR or AP processes, you could designate somebody as a user, or they do the data entry, the input, and then the person who's responsible for approving the data that's entered, reviewing it for accuracy and posting, we could give them the poster role so they can actually post those documents within the system. And then the admin role, so you'll see AP admin, AR admin, GL admin. These roles, you probably want to give somebody who's like an AR user or AP user, you give them the admin role as well. That gives them the ability to kind of tweak some of the settings, add vendors as needed. So if you're an AP and you're entering an invoice, but you need to add a vendor, you would need to have the AP admin role to add that vendor. And then last year we have the GL budget manager. So that just grants people the ability to create GL budgets within the system. So typically it'd be somebody in your accounting or finance department that has that role. All right, and last but not least, we have bill rate manager, cost rate manager, bill budget manager, and cost budget manager. So these roles are kind of unique in that, if you just check the box, it's going to grant them visibility to bill rates or cost rates or bill budgets or cost budgets, but it's limited or it's dependent upon other roles that they have within the system. So, if somebody just has the cost rate manager role checked, by default without some other role combination, they wouldn't have access to cost rates. So if somebody was a project viewer and they had access to a bucket of projects and we gave them the cost rate manager, essentially they would be able to view cost rates for that bucket of projects. All right. So now that we've talked about roles, let's talk about org access and how it relates to roles. So, like I said, with roles, we check the roles that we want to give to each individual within their user profile, or for some project approver, we do have some roles that we can only assign at the project level. So if we want to give somebody broad type access rather than discrete or finite access at the project level, we have the option of leveraging org access. So typically org access is something you would hold close to your vest, right? We give it to the individuals that are the higher level within your organization. So it'd be like a department head or division lead or something like that. But essentially the way it works is we can give them a role. It could be a person role. So if we wanted to give somebody the viewer role, that gives them the ability to run people reports, we can give them org access to, a particular division, say Division A, and they would be able to run people reports for everyone within the organization that's owned by Division A. Same thing applies for projects. So, projects have owning orgs. they also have customer org, so we can restrict org access by either one of those or both of those. So with that said, and the way we want to restrict, if you really want to leverage org access, it's important that your org hierarchy is configured in a manner to facilitate the access that you're trying to accommodate. So if you have a very basic organization, if you just have one internal org, org access really isn't going to do much for you, because you're just going to give access to everything for each individual. So, the more granular your org hierarchy is, the more flexibility you'll have in terms of your org assignments. All right. So our access types here will vary by role. So in the example I gave previously, talked about the viewer role. So that's a people role. So when you go to org access, it's going to ask for the person organization, right? Which person orgs do you want to grant this person visibility to? Whereas on the flip side, if we had a project viewer, the org access types that we're going to see there would be our project org and our project owning org. So, since projects, they're unrelated to our person owning orgs, we would pick a combination of a project org, which is essentially our customer, and our project owning orgs to kind of determine or define the access that particular individual should have. All right. So with these org settings, so there are some property settings where you can designate. So if you pick, the HR admin role, for example, if you just check that box for somebody in Unanet as it comes out of the box, it's really not giving that person HR admin capabilities until we add, some sort of org access to that particular role. But there are some system properties where you can modify the behavior that Unanet takes whenever you first designate somebody as a particular role. So using the HR admin as an example, we can turn a property on that whenever we give somebody that role, that it gives them access to all orgs by default. And we can take a look at that when we dive into the demo later. And there's also some project settings where you can make exceptions. So if you wanted to grant somebody access to all projects within Division A except for this one particular project, within the project profile, we do have the ability to basically tell that project to ignore org access. All right, so our roles that are ineligible for org access here, so we got the admin, P&R admins, those aren't going to give us options for org access. Our user roles, those aren't defined by org access. We kind of touched on bill rate, cost rate managers, bill and cost budget managers and viewers. Those are kind of dependent on other roles for access, so you won't see org access capabilities for those, and then our project specific roles such as the project approver and project lead would not have org access. All right, and then here's where I plan to dive into the demo here. So I figure we hop in and we'll take a look at the property to designate the default behavior for org access. We'll take a look at the org access reference report here. I want to touch on the importance of being aware of alternates, that if you assign somebody as an alternate, they essentially inherit the org access of the individual that they're an alternate for. That's about it.